9 years ago, Apple lost their nerve. And it's because of this, the 12-inch Retina MacBook. This is a device that lives in my head rent-free and has done for nearly a decade now. Because in my mind, this was the last laptop that Apple has made that was really ballsy. This thing took courage. And it failed. And you know what? Since this device, the courage is gone. But that might not be an entirely bad thing, as we'll dive into after a word from today's video sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Basis and their new ultra slim Blade 2 power bank. This 65-watt battery can fast charge an iPhone or a MacBook Air, yet it's just 7.3 millimeters thin at its edges. Don't worry about big bulky batteries weighing you down because Blade 2 is literally thinner than the thinnest MacBook. But boy, it packs a punch. With 2 USB-C ports, you can charge 2 devices simultaneously. And thanks to 12,000 milliamp hour battery capacity, you can charge a MacBook Air or charge an iPhone 2 to 3 times. Plus, its colored display shows state of charge for the battery, amps and volts being delivered, and even the time to fully charge the device that's plugged in. And that feature is especially useful. I love that. Plus, with Basis Digital Intelligent Power, Blade 2 automatically allocates power, protects your devices, and maximizes efficiency, making this the ultimate travel companion. If you want to learn more about Blade 2 and save 30%, check out the link and coupon code in the description down below. And now let's get back to the video. So the 2015 Retina MacBook was the most recent, truly ambitious device that Apple has made, but it was definitely not the first. I mean, step back in time to the original MacBook Air. This thing was a really risky device. Apple tried to accomplish a lot of things here with the singular objective of creating the thinnest laptop in the world. And to pull it off, they had to introduce some remarkable engineering. It involved shrinking the package for the CPU, creating the smallest logic board that had ever been fitted in a Mac, and using the hard drive out of an iPod to fit in this tiny chassis. And as a result of it, this doesn't look like a 16-year-old laptop. It looks way more modern, mainly because the design language that this introduced, now known as the unibody, later went on to dominate the world of laptops, not just from Apple, but other manufacturers as well. This thing gave us so many iconic designs and features. The first multi-touch trackpad on an Apple laptop, the first chiclet-style keyboard on a MacBook. This was also the first MacBook that had an option for solid-state storage, pushing the boundary on what our storage technology could do. And of course, who could forget the classic manila envelope ad? It's still used as an example in marketing classes, and I should know, in my marketing minor, we talked about that ad like 50 times. So the original MacBook Air brought a ton of firsts and new technologies that we still use to this day. But the first MacBook Air was also really bad. The processor in this thing is just too powerful, and anytime you try to do anything, it throttles down to a single core, making it extremely slow. And using the 80GB hard drive out of an MP3 player to run OS X was definitely not the best call in the world. Oh, and did I mention that this thing cost $1,800 in 2008? It was not supposed to be a budget device. It was supposed to push the boundaries of what a laptop could look like. And that's what they tried to do again in 2015 with the Retina MacBook. This thing introduced a ton of new stuff to the world of Apple. To make a laptop this thin with this tapered design meant they couldn't fit a normal trackpad, so they had to invent the Force Touch trackpad, which I think we can all agree is the best trackpad ever made, full stop, period. They also had to re-engineer the display to have greater pixel aperture, allowing for a thinner system overall. This is something that we're still benefiting from now. We're also still benefiting from the speaker design, because when Apple made this thing, there was so little room in it, they had to combine the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth antennas with the speaker housings. That's a brilliant idea, and it's one that MacBooks still use to this day to maximize the amount of batteries they can fit inside of them. Oh, and speaking of batteries, to fit them in this tiny enclosure, Apple had to create a terraced battery system that creates these contoured layered battery cells and makes this thing actually pretty usable. And another innovation that was needed to make a laptop this thin and light, well, USB-C. This was the first MacBook with a USB-C port, and that's all it has, notoriously. That was, of course, quite controversial in 2015, but I think now we all kind of accept that USB-C is the future, and this was the first laptop that brought it to the mainstream. Now, unfortunately, there were some not as great technologies that were brought to the mainstream by this device. Of course, the butterfly keyboard is the most notorious. That thing created a massive headache for Apple, and they're still paying millions of dollars in settlements over how bad these keyboards were. And inside this MacBook is an Intel Core M chip that was absolutely painful to use. It was slower than an iPhone, and running macOS on this thing, it was never great. It gets super duper hot, and it absolutely burns through battery if you're doing anything more than the most basic of tasks. But now that we've had 10 years to reflect upon the 12-inch MacBook, I think we can appreciate how much it actually gave us, how many of those technologies still endure to this day. And there's even rumors that this was the device that convinced Apple that they needed to build their own processors. So perhaps we owe some of Apple Silicon's success to this thing's failure. And this is the kind of stuff that happens when Apple takes a big risk. They build a device like this that just shouldn't exist. For 2015, I mean, this thing still looks insanely futuristic. Same with this MacBook Air from 2008. These are two devices that should not have existed and that were also very flawed, but that brought a ton of advancement to the space. But this is something that Apple doesn't seem to be interested in doing anymore. I mean, these are just two examples, but you go back over the past 27 years since Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, and you will find countless examples of very flawed boundary-pushing devices. But now in the age of Apple Silicon, as good as these devices are, they're not that risky. Gone is Apple's endless drive to make everything thinner and lighter. In fact, the current generation MacBook Pro is just as thick as the Retina MacBook Pro that launched 12 years ago. And while the current generation MacBook Air is undoubtedly very thin, it's nowhere near as boundary pushing as that 12-inch Retina MacBook was. There's nothing wrong with it, but there's also nothing that's really all that exciting about it. And even before that, the M1 MacBook Air, well, this is just the same design as the 2018 MacBook Air, which was the same design as the MacBook Pro from 2016, which was based off of, you guessed it, the 12-inch Retina MacBook. So, yeah, you can kind of see where I'm getting at, huh? It has been a while since Apple has really pushed the boundaries on their laptops. Right now, we are living in the fruits of the labor that was done 10 years ago in pushing the boundaries, getting these devices that really weren't all that good. But now they are. But it does make me wonder, where is the boundary that we can push next? I think that Apple Vision Pro might fit that bill. It's definitely the most ambitious thing that Apple has done in a long time. But I'm not sure it's going to translate to the MacBook and the iPhone and the iPad. Right now, it's kind of existing in its own space, and we'll see if that's going to catch on. I personally think that it will, but we're not going to be replacing MacBooks with that anytime soon, or iPhones or iPads for that matter. So my challenge to Apple is this. They're not listening, so it doesn't really matter, but my challenge is this. I want to see a device that really tries to accomplish something new, something that doesn't exist out there or that hasn't been tried before. Apple Silicon and the current generation of MacBook Pros are the best laptops Apple has ever made, but I want them to be even better, and they're gonna have to take a risk to do that. Let me know what risk you think Apple should take to create the best laptops in the world in the comments below. And of course, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Definitely got a little bit philosophical here today, which I wasn't planning on, but you know what? That's fun. Almost as fun as subscribing and leaving a like down below, which you should do now. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next one.